Have you ever wondered how a single moment can change the entire course of your life? One instant you are holding on for dear life. The next you are falling straight into the arms of someone who might just hold your future. Eliza Carraway never planned to leave her world in Boston behind. Yet on a dusty Montana trail, a runaway wagon hurled her into danger and into the steady embrace of Jacob McKenna, a cowboy who appeared at just the right time. But what happens after the rescue? What if you found yourself torn between the life you thought you knew and the wild, untamed promise of a new beginning? Would you return to comfort and familiarity or stay to face the unknown, led only by the hope of love and belonging? As you listen, imagine for a moment that it was you on that wagon, your heart racing, your choices narrowing. Which road would you have taken? This is not just a story of survival. It is a story of destiny, of second chances, and of love found in the most unlikely of places. Stay with us as we journey through their tale, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you won't miss a single heartbeat of this adventure. The pounding of hooves and the crack of a whip tore through the Montana wilderness as Eliza Carraway clung desperately to the side of the runaway wagon. Her knuckles whitened with strain, every muscle in her arms screaming as fear surged through her chest. She knew she could not hold on much longer. It was 1885, and what was meant to be a simple trip to Silvergate had turned into a fight for her very life. "Help!" she cried, but her voice was swallowed by the rush of wind and the grinding wheels jolting along the rugged trail. The team of horses, spooked by a rattlesnake, had bolted at full gallop. The aged driver had been thrown from his seat almost immediately, leaving Eliza alone on the careening wagon as it thundered down the mountainside. A sharp curve wrenched her loose at last. Eliza felt her grip break, her body hurled into open air. The sky and forest spun together in a blur of blue and green. She shut her eyes, bracing for the bone-shattering impact. Instead, she struck something solid, but not the ground's strong arms closed around her, softening the fall. She and her rescuer tumbled across the dirt. His frame curled protectively around her until they skidded to a halt. "I've got you, ma'am," a steady voice reassured, low and breathless from the exertion. Eliza opened her eyes and found herself staring into a pair of striking blue eyes set in a sun-bronzed face, beneath a weather-worn leather hat. Dust swirled about them, clinging to his broad shoulders and the bandana loose at his throat. "The wagon," she gasped, trying to rise. "Let it go," he answered firmly, still keeping her secure. "Nothing in there is worth your life." As if to prove his point, a deafening crash echoed through the valley as the wagon smashed to ruin somewhere below. "Are you hurt?" he asked at last, easing his hold and helping her upright. Eliza brushed dirt from her torn traveling dress, her voice trembling. "I don't think so, thanks to you." He tipped his hat back, revealing thick dark hair. "Jacob McKenna," he said simply. "Eliza Carraway," she replied, offering her still shaking hand. "You just saved my life, Mr. McKenna." Jake's mouth curved into a modest smile, a dimple showing in his cheek. "Only did what had to be done. Miss Carraway." They both knew few men could have managed such a rescue. He helped her steady on her feet, his hand resting lightly at her elbow. She was taller than most women he'd known, her head nearly to his chin. Chestnut hair had tumbled loose in the struggle, framing a face smudged with dirt, yet strikingly beautiful. "We should check on your driver," Jake said, scanning back along the trail. "Silas Turner." Eliza nodded anxiously. He was thrown almost as soon as the horses bolted. Together they retraced their steps, Eliza wincing as her ankle throbbed, though it seemed not badly injured. They found Silas seated against the bank, shaken but awake. "Miss Carraway," the old man exclaimed with relief. "Thank the Lord you're safe. I couldn't hold those horses once that snake jumped." "It isn't your fault." "Silas," Eliza assured him gently, kneeling despite her own discomfort. "Are you badly hurt?" Silas grimaced, motioning toward his leg bent at a wrong angle. "Reckon my riding days are done." Jake crouched beside him, examining quickly. "It's broken a clean break from what I can tell. You'll need a doctor. My ranch is about 3 miles from here. I've a wagon and a team there. I can get you both back, then ride on to Cedar Ridge for the doctor." "That's generous, but I'd hate to trouble you," Eliza began. "Miss Carraway," Jake interrupted gently, "you're miles from Silvergate with no transport, an injured driver, and a sprained ankle of your own. This isn't trouble. It's the only reasonable course." Eliza bit her lip, recognizing the truth. "Thank you, Mr. McKenna." "Jake," he corrected with a smile. "Anyone I pull out of death's hands gets to call me Jake." Despite the strain of the moment, Eliza found herself smiling faintly back. "Then you must call me Eliza." Jake fashioned a splint for Silas using branches and torn strips of cloth from his own bandana, easing the man against a tree for comfort. Before leaving, he pressed a canteen into Eliza's hands. "Plenty of water. Stay in the shade and rest that ankle. I'll be back with the wagon inside the hour." Eliza nodded, her throat dry as she took a grateful drink. "We'll be all right. Please be careful." Jake's blue eyes lingered on her longer than necessary. "Always am." With that, he swung onto his chestnut gelding and galloped down the trail. As the sound of hooves faded, Eliza let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Settling beside Silas Turner, she tried to steady her racing heart, the memory of strong arms still fresh around her. Silas Turner sipped from the canteen Eliza held out to him, his hands trembling slightly as he steadied the vessel against his lips. He swallowed, then gave a satisfied sigh. "That young cowboy of yours is a good man," he remarked with a half-smile, his weathered face lined with exhaustion. "I saw the whole thing from where I landed. Never in all my years have I seen anyone move that quick. The way he caught you, well, that was a miracle if ever there was one." Eliza sat in the dust beside him, her ankle throbbing and her heart still unsettled from the day's ordeal. Her eyes lingered on the empty trail where Jacob McKenna had disappeared moments earlier. "He certainly appeared at just the right moment," she admitted softly. The words carried more weight than she intended, and Silas studied her with a knowing gaze. "What brings you so far out to Silvergate, Miss Carraway? If you don't mind me asking." Silas asked after a moment, his voice thoughtful. Eliza's expression sobered. "My father passed away 3 months ago. I've come to settle his affairs and decide what to do with his property." Silas blinked in surprise, straightening against the tree behind him. "Judge Edmund Carraway was your father. Well, I'll be—" His voice carried deep respect. "He was a good man, fair to rich and poor alike. This whole territory is worse off without him." Eliza lowered her gaze, her voice hushed. "Thank you. I hadn't seen him in 5 years. Mother and I remained in Ashford after they separated. I regret that now." Silas's tone gentled. "He spoke of you often. You know, always with a gleam in his eye when he mentioned his daughter back east getting her schooling. He was proud of you." To her surprise, tears welled from Eliza's eyes. She brushed them quickly, not wanting the old driver to see. She had traveled west prepared to briskly handle her father's estate and return east to the safety of her lectures and her books. But now, bruised, dust-stained, and stranded on a rugged trail waiting for a stranger who had twice caught her in his arms. The certainty of her plans began to unravel. True to his promise, Jake returned in less than an hour, the sound of steady hooves announcing his arrival before the wagon came into view. He drove a sturdy farm wagon drawn by two broad-shouldered draft horses, their pace calm and reliable. He had thought ahead, bringing blankets and pillows to cushion his passengers. With practiced care, he lifted Silas into the bed of the wagon, adjusting the splint on his broken leg and propping him comfortably with rolled blankets. When Jake turned toward Eliza, she was already attempting to climb aboard, biting back a wince as her injured ankle protested. "Allow me," Jake said firmly, and before she could argue, he bent and swept her into his arms. Eliza gasped, startled, her arms instinctively circling his neck for balance. For the second time that day, she found herself pressed to his chest, surrounded by the scent of leather, horse, and pine, something steadying and masculine that was entirely his own. Her heart betrayed her by fluttering traitorously. "I can manage," she protested weakly, her face hot with embarrassment. "I can walk." "No sense worsening that ankle," Jake replied, his voice rumbling through his chest against her cheek. He placed her gently on the wooden seat, then climbed up beside her, taking the reins with practiced ease. As the wagon rolled forward, Jake spoke of his home. "My place, the Circle M Ranch, was started by my father just after the war," he said, eyes on the trail ahead. "I took over 5 years ago when his health failed. He's still with us, mostly sitting on the porch, telling me how he'd do everything better if he were in charge." There was affection in his voice, a son's gentle exasperation. "You must be close," Eliza observed quietly. He nodded. "He's a hard man in some ways, but fair. He taught me all I know about ranching, about horses, and about treating folks right." His blue eyes flicked toward her. "What about your family?" Eliza spoke briefly of her situation, her father's passing, her teaching post in Ashford, her mother's remarriage to a wealthy merchant. She explained how she intended to settle the estate quickly and return to her familiar life in the East. "So you plan to go back east once the affairs are settled?" Jake asked, keeping his gaze on the winding road. "That was my plan," she admitted, though I am beginning to realize it may take longer than expected. "Montana has a way of complicating plans," he said with a wry smile. The trail widened to a well-tended road, and soon the wagon crested a hill. Eliza caught her breath at the sight before them. The valley spread out in a broad sweep of golden grass and rolling pasture, dotted with cattle and flanked by pine-covered slopes. Nestled in the middle stood the Circle M Ranch, a handsome main house, several outbuildings, and corrals busy with horses. "It is beautiful," Eliza murmured. Pride shone in Jake's eyes. "Been in the family for 20 years. Not the biggest spread in Montana, but we hold our own." As the wagon drew closer, a gray-haired woman appeared on the porch, her back straight, her expression tightening as she took in the unexpected wagon and its passengers. "That's Mrs. Nora Kincaid, our housekeeper," Jake explained. "She's been with us since I was a boy. She'll see you settled while I ride to Cedar Ridge for the doctor." Mrs. Kincaid proved as capable as promised. Within the hour, Silas had been installed in a downstairs bedroom, his broken leg carefully propped. Eliza was guided upstairs to a cozy guest room, her ankle wrapped snugly, a basin of cool water ready for her use. Jake had already ridden off toward Cedar Ridge, leaving behind the quiet steadiness of his household, left alone at last. Eliza took stock of her circumstances. Her trunk and belongings had gone down with the wrecked wagon. She had nothing but the torn dress on her back and her small purse, which had mercifully remained strapped to her wrist. Everything else, her books, her clothing, her carefully chosen mementos, was gone. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Kincaid entered, carrying a neatly folded stack of clothing. These belonged to Mr. McKenna's sister, she explained. She married and moved west to Pacifica, but left some things behind. You look about her size. Eliza's throat tightened at the unexpected kindness. Thank you, she said sincerely. There's fresh water on the dresser, Mrs. Kincaid continued briskly. Dinner will be ready in an hour if you feel up to joining us. When she departed, Eliza gratefully bathed away the dust and grit of her ordeal. She slipped into the borrowed dress, a simple calico in faded blue. It fit reasonably well, though an inch short at the hem. She rebraided her chestnut hair, pinning it up as neatly as she could without her usual toiletries. She caught her reflection in the small mirror and almost did not recognize herself. She looked less the Boston lecturer and more a woman on the frontier, weary yet strangely alive. She eased down the staircase carefully, hand tight on the railing to spare her ankle. The house smelled of roast meat and fresh bread. The sound of Silas's low voice drifted from his room below. For the first time since the runaway horses had thrown her into chaos, Eliza allowed herself to breathe deeply and to consider what had happened. Her carefully laid plans had been overturned in an instant, and somewhere down the road, a cowboy with piercing blue eyes and quiet strength had become an inescapable part of her story. When Eliza finally made her way down the broad staircase, one hand clinging to the polished rail for balance, she found Jacob McKenna standing near the hearth with a tall, middle-aged man beside him. The stranger had kind eyes set behind wire spectacles and carried himself with the brisk assurance of one used to being obeyed. His black satchel rested on a nearby table. He had already examined Silas Turner and confirmed what Jacob suspected: a clean break. Painful, but not life-threatening, so long as the old driver rested for several weeks. And now, let us see to our other patient, the doctor said warmly, turning toward Eliza. Dr. Amos Whitfield, at your service. Eliza offered him her hand, and he bowed slightly before kneeling to examine her ankle. His touch was gentle, yet efficient. After probing the tender joint and studying her wince, he nodded with satisfaction. A mild sprain, nothing more. Keep it wrapped snug. Stay off it as best you can for a few days, and you will be back on your feet in no time. Relieved, Eliza thanked him. Mrs. Nora Kincaid soon ushered them all into the dining room. Dinner that evening was simple, yet satisfying roast beef carved into generous slices, potatoes steaming with butter, and fresh bread that smelled of yeast and home. Eliza ate with an appetite sharpened by exhaustion. As the meal progressed, the door at the far end of the room opened, and an older man strode in. He was well past 70, his hair a shock of white, but his frame remained broad and commanding. His eyes, a startling blue, mirrored those of his son. Jacob rose quickly. Eliza, this is my father, Ephraim McKenna. So you are Judge Carraway's daughter, Ephraim said, studying her with an intensity that made her sit straighter. His voice was robust, his presence impossible to ignore. Your father once helped me in a bitter dispute over water rights. Fair man, stern but just. This land lost something the day he passed. Eliza felt her throat tighten. Thank you, Mr. McKenna. I'm only now beginning to realize how respected he was here. Call me Ephraim, he insisted, waving a dismissive hand. Any woman my son pulls from certain death is nearly family already. Color rushed to Eliza's cheeks. Your son was very brave. I owe him more than I can say. Jacob gave a modest shrug. Just happened to be in the right place. Yet when his eyes met hers across the table, there was warmth there that denied his casual words. "Nonsense," Ephraim declared. "Not every man could have done what you did. Jacob, my son's too humble for his own good. Been that way since he was a boy." The conversation soon flowed easily. Ephraim regaled them with tales of the early ranch days, stories filled with hard winters, cattle thieves, and triumphs wrung from the stubborn land. Now and then Jacob gently corrected his father's more colorful embellishments, which only made the elder man laugh. The good-natured back and forth drew smiles from Eliza, who found herself more at ease than she expected. After dinner, Jacob suggested they take in the evening air. He guided Eliza onto the wide porch where Mrs. Kincaid had already set a cushioned chair and a footstool for her ankle. Jacob adjusted it carefully, ensuring her comfort before settling into a chair beside her. The sun was sliding behind the mountains, streaking the sky with fiery hues of orange and violet. Eliza drew a deep breath, overwhelmed by the beauty. "It is so different from Ashford," she murmured. "Everything here seems larger, somehow." Jacob nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "That's Montana for you. Big sky, big mountains, big country. Makes a person feel small, but in a way that teaches humility rather than despair." "I think I understand," Eliza said thoughtfully. "Back east, everything is about what people build the houses, the universities, the societies. Here, it feels as though the land itself is the true power, long before we ever set foot." Jacob smiled at her words. "Exactly. Though we're building in our own way, too. Fences, barns, families." Darkness crept across the valley, and lanterns were lit on the porch, casting pools of golden light. Jacob disappeared inside and returned carrying a pot of coffee and 2 cups. He poured one for her, his hand steady even after a long day. "I sent a telegram to Silvergate while I was in town," he told her as he passed her the cup. "Let the bank know what happened, that you would be delayed. Figured that was where you planned to go first." Eliza was touched by the thoughtfulness. "Yes. I had an appointment with my father's attorney tomorrow. I will have to reschedule once I am able to reach town. I can take you to Silvergate in a few days, once your ankle allows," Jacob offered. "We need supplies anyway, and I would feel better knowing you arrived safely." "You've already done so much," Eliza protested softly. "I would not impose further." Jacob's expression grew serious. "It is no imposition. Truth is, I would worry otherwise." The sincerity in his tone warmed her more than the coffee in her hands. They sat in companionable silence for some time, watching as the stars appeared, one by one, across the endless dome of sky. The Milky Way stretched like a river of light above them. At length, Jacob spoke again. "Your father's letters mentioned you taught at a college." "What do you teach? Literature and composition," Eliza answered, brightening despite herself. "I particularly love the poets Wordsworth, Shelley, Keats. Their words speak to me in ways nothing else does." Jacob's expression lit with genuine interest. "We have a library here, thanks to my mother. She insisted on ordering books from the East. Said living in the wilderness did not mean we had to think like wilderness folk. I think she would have liked you." Eliza's eyes widened. "I would very much like to see it. Tomorrow," Jacob promised. "For now, you should rest." As if on cue, "Mrs." Kincaid appeared in the doorway. "Miss Carraway, your bed is turned down. There's fresh water in your room." Jacob rose and extended his arm. "Allow me," leaning lightly against his strength. Eliza climbed the staircase once more, her steps slow but steady. At her chamber door, she turned, her voice quiet. "I cannot imagine what might have happened had you not been there today." "But I was," Jacob answered simply, "and I am glad of it, though I regret the danger you endured." His gaze held hers, steady and unflinching, and Eliza felt an unfamiliar flutter deep in her chest, something between gratitude and something warmer. At last he tipped his hat. "Good night, Eliza. Sleep well. Good night, Jacob." When she entered her room, she sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, her heart beating faster than it ought. The day had been one of terror and deliverance, of pain and unexpected comfort. Strangers had become something more than acquaintances in the span of hours. As she lay down and drifted toward sleep, her last conscious thought was not of fear, nor even of her father's estate, but of blue eyes and strong arms that had caught her from disaster. The following days unfolded with a rhythm she had not anticipated. True to his word, Jacob showed her the library, a cozy room lined with shelves brimming with volumes, everything from classics of literature to manuals on ranching and horsemanship. Eliza ran her fingers reverently over the worn spines, her heart lifting when she discovered volumes of the poets she loved most. "My mother treasured these," Jacob explained, watching her with quiet pride. She said, "Books remind us there is beauty in the world beyond our fences." Eliza smiled, cradling a leather-bound edition of Shelley. "She was a wise woman, and you have preserved her wisdom." In those quiet days, as her ankle healed and Silas recovered under Mrs. Kincaid's steady care, Eliza found herself drawn further into the life of the Circle M Ranch. Each evening brought conversation on the porch, stories from Ephraim, and long silences beneath the wide Montana sky where words were unnecessary. What had begun as a terrifying accident was already shaping into something far more complicated, and perhaps far more precious, than Eliza Carraway had ever imagined. The morning light spilled through the tall windows of the Circle M Ranch, warming the polished wood floors as Eliza Carraway wandered into the library. The shelves stretched floor to ceiling, filled with volumes that bore the marks of loving use. When her eyes landed on a row of poetry, her breath caught. She pulled down a leather-bound copy of the Romantics, the edges soft with age. "Your mother had remarkable taste," Eliza whispered as she traced the gold lettering with reverence. Jake leaned against the doorway, his arms crossed casually over his chest. A smile touched his lips. "She would have liked you. She always said education meant nothing if it didn't teach a person to appreciate beauty when they found it." Their eyes met briefly, and Eliza felt a warmth rise in her chest. She closed the book carefully and returned it to the shelf. Her ankle grew stronger with each day. By the third morning, she could walk without much discomfort, though Jake remained firm in his reminders for her to take it easy. Silas Turner was also mending, though his broken leg would keep him immobile for weeks to come. Life at the ranch settled into a rhythm that Eliza had not expected. She lent her hands to Mrs. Nora Kincaid in the kitchen, stirring stews and kneading dough, and found herself repairing several of Jake's shirts that had piled up for want of mending. Ephraim McKenna seemed to delight in having a new audience, filling the evenings with tales of prairie fires, wild winters, and cattle drives from decades past. Jacob came and went throughout the day, tending to the endless duties of ranch life, but he never failed to check on her, sometimes only with a quick word or a lingering glance that left her unaccountably breathless. And in the evenings, when the house grew quiet, they often found themselves side by side on the porch, speaking softly beneath a stretch of stars. One night, as the cool air brushed against them. Jake leaned back in his chair and looked up at the heavens. "Most folks assume a rancher doesn't care much for books or ideas," he said. "But out here a man needs his mind as much as his hands. When you're riding fence lines with nothing but the wind for company, you get to thinking." "What do you think about?" Eliza asked, curious. He considered for a moment. "The future, mostly. How to breed stronger cattle. How to improve the land. Sometimes about the world beyond Montana, and where I might fit in it. And sometimes—" His mouth quirked with a dry smile. "Just whether the mountain lion I heard last night is eyeing my calves." Eliza laughed, charmed by the blend of seriousness and humor, a balance between the philosophical and the practical. She teased. "Exactly." His eyes glimmered. "And you? What occupies the mind of a literature professor when she isn't lecturing?" She looked down at her hands folded in her lap. "Stories. Always stories. Those written in books, and those lived out by people every day. Everyone carries a story within them, if you look closely enough. And what's yours?" "Eliza Carraway," he asked softly. She hesitated. "Nothing extraordinary. A privileged childhood, a good education, a secure position at a college. The most dramatic thing that ever happened to me was being thrown from a runaway wagon." "Somehow," Jake said gently, "I doubt that's all there is. There's a sadness in your eyes sometimes. Not always, but I've seen it." Eliza started. Few people ever noticed what she worked so hard to hide. She drew a slow breath. "My parents' separation was painful. My mother blamed Montana for taking my father from us. She refused to visit, and eventually he stopped coming east. For too long. I sided with her. My letters to him grew fewer until they stopped. By the time I realized what I had lost, it felt too late to make it right. And now you're here," Jake said with quiet understanding. "Yes, to say goodbye, and to decide what to do with his land. I imagine I will sell it, though that feels like erasing the last piece of him." Jake reached across the small space between them and laid his calloused hand gently over hers. "For what it's worth, I believe he would understand. And I think he'd be proud of the woman you've become." His touch lingered only a moment, yet it sent a warmth flooding through her. She squeezed his hand briefly before they both pulled away, suddenly aware of the intimacy of the gesture. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice unsteady, "for listening and for understanding." The next morning at breakfast, Jake set down his coffee cup. "Your ankle seems strong enough. Tomorrow. I'll take you into Silvergate so you can see to your business." Eliza forced a smile. "I imagine you're right. I should be anxious to get on with it." Yet the thought of leaving the ranch filled her with reluctance she could not explain. "And what of Silas?" she asked quickly. "He'll stay put." Ephraim rumbled from the head of the table. "No sense moving a man with a broken leg. He's welcome here until he's ready to travel." "Then yes," Eliza agreed, her smile a shade too bright. "Tomorrow will be fine." Later that morning, as Jake saddled his horse, he glanced at her with a sudden thought. "I've got to check on a mare in the far pasture. She's close to foaling. Would you like to ride along? The air will do you good, and I can show you more of the ranch." Eliza hesitated. "I haven't ridden in years, not since I was a girl visiting my grandparents in Vermont." He grinned, tightening the cinch. "I've just the horse for you. Rosie's as gentle as they come. A quiet ride might even help loosen that ankle." The chance to spend more time with him was too tempting to refuse. She agreed, and after changing into her clean traveling dress far more practical than the borrowed calico, she joined him at the stables. True to his word, Rosie was calm and steady. Jake lifted Eliza into the saddle with hands sure and strong, his touch sparking that familiar flutter in her chest. They set off at a leisurely pace, the horses' hooves thudding softly against the earth. As they rode, Jake pointed out the landmarks of his youth, the grove where he'd learned to rope, the creek where he'd nearly drowned trying to catch a fish, the ridge where his father had once scolded him for losing half a herd to a sudden storm. His stories were full of humor and humility, and Eliza found herself laughing more than she had in years. They crossed a clear stream and followed a narrow trail up a gentle slope. At the crest, the valley spread out beneath them, golden fields and winding rivers framed by distant mountains. Eliza reined Rosie to a halt, awe in her voice. "It's breathtaking." Jake brought his horse alongside hers. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch. I come here to think, or just to remind myself how fortunate I am to call this land home." They dismounted, letting the horses rest in the shade of a cottonwood. Settling together on a sun-warmed boulder, Jake reached into his saddlebag and drew out 2 apples. He handed one to her with a smile. Eliza accepted it, the simple gesture carrying a weight she could not name. As they sat in the stillness of the high ground, the wide Montana sky arching above them, she realized she was beginning to see not only the land, but also the man beside her with new, wondering eyes. They shared apples and quiet companionship on the sun-warmed boulder until Jake finally spoke, his voice thoughtful. "I have been thinking," he said, tossing the core into the grass. "About what?" Eliza asked, brushing her skirt smooth. "Your father's land," he replied. "You told me it lies just outside Silvergate. If you plan to sell it, you ought to have someone look it over first. Make certain you get a fair price. I would be glad to ride out there with you and give you my opinion, if you would like." His offer touched her. "That is very kind. I know nothing about ranch property values. I would welcome your judgment." Jake nodded, satisfied. "Then it is settled. Tomorrow we ride to Silvergate. You can meet your attorney. And afterward, we will ride out to the property." They began to gather their things, but suddenly Jake stilled, his body tense, his eyes narrowed at something beyond the tree line. "Do not move," he said quietly, his tone firm enough that Eliza obeyed without question. Her gaze followed his, and at first she saw only the shifting shadows of brush. Then, as though the forest itself breathed, a tawny form materialized, a mountain lion, sleek and powerful, its golden eyes locked on them. Eliza's breath caught in her throat. Jake's hand eased toward the rifle in his saddle scabbard, every movement deliberate. "Stay calm," he murmured. "They avoid people more often than not. This one is only curious." The big cat's muscles rippled as it crouched low, tail flicking. Eliza's heart pounded in her ears. Jake lifted the rifle, but instead of drawing a bead on the animal, he angled the barrel skyward and fired a single shot. The report cracked through the still valley, echoing off the ridges. At once the lion spun, vanishing into the underbrush with a flash of tawny hide. Jake lowered the weapon. No harm done. He was just passing through. Eliza let out a shaky breath. "Do they come often?" "Often enough," he said, returning the rifle to its place. He reached for Rosie's reins and guided her closer. "But attacks are rare. Still, a man or woman does well to remember this land is not tamed. We live alongside what has been here far longer than us." The truth of it settled over her as they rode on. Montana was magnificent, but it carried edges of danger that Boston never could. Yet she found herself exhilarated rather than afraid, her pulse alive in a way she had not felt in years. They stopped by the pasture to check on the mare, who stood grazing calmly, her sides heavy with foal. Jake studied her carefully, pronouncing that she would likely deliver within the week, satisfied. They turned back toward the ranch. The afternoon sun stretched low across the valley, painting the land in honeyed light. Shadows lengthened, and the wind carried the scent of grass and pine. When they unsaddled the horses at the barn, Eliza turned to him, her cheeks flushed with the ride. "Thank you for today. I enjoyed seeing more of the ranch." His eyes softened, crinkling at the corners. "And I enjoyed showing it to you." Something unspoken passed between them then, a warmth that made her heartbeat stumble. She busied herself with smoothing Rosie's mane, yet her hands trembled slightly. That evening, Mrs. Nora Kincaid outdid herself in honor of Eliza's last night at the Circle M. Roast chicken golden from the oven, vegetables fresh from the garden, and an apple pie so rich that Jake declared it the best in 3 counties. Laughter and conversation flowed, though Eliza felt a thread of sadness tugging beneath the cheer. Tomorrow meant leaving, and she found herself reluctant. After the dishes were cleared away, she excused herself to her room. She packed her few belongings, her mended traveling dress, the borrowed shawl, and the simple items Mrs. Kincaid had provided. She sat at the small writing desk and penned a letter to her mother, explaining her delay and the unexpected kindness of the McKenna family. When her hand grew weary, she sealed the page carefully, tucking it into her purse. When she descended again, the house was quiet. Only the soft glow of a lantern on the porch betrayed another presence. Jake stood there alone, gazing out across the moonlit valley. He straightened when he saw her. "I thought you had gone to bed," he said. "Not yet," she answered, settling into the chair that had become hers these last days. "The night is too beautiful to waste," and indeed it was. The nearly full moon bathed the valley in silver light. Crickets sang, and a cool breeze rustled the cottonwoods, carrying with it the fragrance of sage and pine. They sat together in easy silence, the kind that needed no words. Finally, Jake asked, "Will you miss Montana when you return to Ashford?" Eliza thought about it. "Yes, more than I expected to. This place," she gestured toward the valley, "it has a way of getting under your skin." "That it does," Jake agreed. "I tried leaving once. Those 2 years I spent at university. I found myself homesick for things I had never noticed before. The color of the sky at dusk, the smell of rain on sagebrush, the way sound carries across the valley on still mornings." She looked at him with surprise and admiration. "You are a poet at heart, Jacob McKenna." He laughed softly, shaking his head. "Do not let that get around. It would ruin my reputation as a hardened rancher." Their eyes met and held in the silver glow. In that long moment something stirred an awareness, an unspoken possibility that neither dared name aloud. Jake cleared his throat at last. "We should turn in. Tomorrow will be a long ride to Silvergate, longer still with the wagon." "Of course," she said, rising reluctantly. As she turned toward the doorway, he stepped closer. His voice was low, intimate. "Eliza, whatever happens tomorrow or after, I want you to know one thing. I am glad that Wagon threw you into my path." Before she could respond, he bent and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek, the briefest touch yet warm enough to send her heart racing. "Sleep well," he murmured, then turned inside, leaving her standing alone, with her hand pressed to her cheek and her pulse fluttering wildly. Dawn came wrapped in mist. The valley lay hushed under a pale veil of morning light, promising another fair day. Eliza dressed in her freshly laundered traveling clothes, packed the borrowed garments she would return, and tied her bonnet. At the breakfast table, the mood was subdued. Silas Turner clasped her hand, thanking her for her visits to his bedside. "You're a fine young lady," he said gruffly. "May your business in Silvergate go smoothly." Ephraim McKenna shook her hand firmly, his blue eyes softening. "You are welcome back here any time. Do not forget that. Mrs. Kincaid pressed a bundle of food into her hands and pulled her into a brief but heartfelt embrace. "You've brought sunshine back to this house," the housekeeper whispered. "It has been too long since we felt a woman's presence here." Eliza swallowed hard against the lump in her throat. She had not expected leaving to feel so heavy. With a grateful smile, she thanked them all. Outside, the wagon waited, hitched and ready, with Jake holding the reins. The mist was lifting, and the road to Silvergate stretched ahead, carrying her back to Judy, to decisions, and to a future she could no longer see as clearly as before. But one thing she knew: she would never forget the Circle M Ranch, nor the man whose strong arms had caught her on a wild Montana trail and changed the course of her life. Jacob had the wagon ready just after breakfast, the same sturdy vehicle he had used days before to carry her and Silas Turner from the trail. He steadied Eliza as she climbed to the seat, his hands resting a moment longer than necessary at her waist before he swung up beside her and gathered the reins. The team leaned into their collars, and slowly the Circle M Ranch slipped behind them. On the porch, Ephraim McKenna raised a hand in farewell, his frame outlined against the sunlight. Eliza lifted her own hand in return, a lump rising in her throat. She had not expected to feel so attached to this place or these people. "They've grown fond of you," Jacob said, glancing sideways. "Especially my father. He hasn't had a new audience for his stories in years." "I have grown fond of them, too," Eliza admitted softly. She gestured toward the wide landscape rolling away on every side. "Of all of this, really, it's a world apart from everything I knew back east." The journey toward Silvergate proved more pleasant than she had expected. Jacob filled the miles with tales of the territory, native legends that clung to the rivers and mountains, yarns of early settlers and miners, and the wild years of the gold rush when Silvergate had been little more than tents pitched on muddy ground. Eliza listened with rapt attention, marveling at how much history lay beneath the land they traveled. By mid-afternoon, the sound of hammering, wagon wheels, and shouting voices signaled their arrival. Silvergate was alive with energy. Miners trudged through the streets with their tools. Merchants hawked goods from storefronts. Women bustled with baskets in hand, and children darted among the throngs. After the serene days at the ranch, the noise felt overwhelming. Jacob guided the wagon through the crowded main street and pulled up before a respectable-looking hotel. Its sign read, "The Silvergate House, owned by friends of my father," Jacob explained. "You'll be comfortable here." He helped her down, carrying her small bag inside with ease. At the desk, a plump woman with bright eyes greeted them warmly. "Well, if it isn't Jacob McKenna," she said with delight. "Months since I last saw you in town. Ranch life keeping you too busy." Jacob grinned. "It keeps me honest. Mrs. Bramwell, this is Miss Eliza Carraway, Judge Carraway's daughter. She'll be in town for a few days settling her father's affairs." At the mention of the judge, Mrs. Bramwell's expression softened. "My condolences? Miss Carraway? Your father was a good man, fair to everyone. We still feel his absence in this town." "Thank you," Eliza replied, touched once more by how deeply her father had been respected. Once her room was arranged, Jacob turned to her. "I need to see about some supplies. The attorney's office is close by. Shall I walk with you?" She shook her head gently. "I should be fine. Let's meet back here for dinner. Perhaps you can tell me more about what to expect when we visit my father's property tomorrow." "I'd like that," Jacob said. 6 o'clock in the dining room. With that, he tipped his hat and departed. Eliza freshened herself as best she could, then made her way to the law office. Mr. Thaddeus Pike, a lean man with spectacles perched precisely on his nose, rose from behind a desk stacked high with documents. "Miss Carraway," he greeted formally. "We feared something had happened when you did not arrive as scheduled. Your telegram explained enough. Though what a misfortune to begin your stay so." "It could have been far worse," Eliza said, thinking of the runaway wagon and Jacob's arms catching her from certain death. "I was fortunate to find help." "Mr. Pike nodded, already sifting through papers. "Now, as to the estate." "The will is simple enough. You are sole heir. The assets include a small ranch 5 miles outside Silvergate, a modest account at the bank, and a collection of personal effects stored here. The ranch is unencumbered by debt. There have been inquiries from prospective buyers since your father's passing. Land near Silvergate is always in demand." He slid a paper across the desk. "This is an inventory. As you see, the ranch comprises 160 acres with a cabin, barn, and corral. No livestock. Your father kept a few horses, maintained by a caretaker, Mr. Gideon Frost. But the judge never ranched actively. He used it more as a retreat." Eliza studied the document. She remembered her father's letters describing quiet afternoons spent there, away from town, where the air was clean and the world felt still. "I would like to see the property myself before making any decisions," she told Mr. Pike. "Of course. I can hire a driver." "That won't be necessary," Eliza interrupted. "A friend has offered to accompany me." Mr. Pike raised one eyebrow, but asked no questions. "Very well. Here are the keys. Mr. Frost checks the place every few days, but otherwise it remains empty." Their business concluded, Eliza accepted a small box containing her father's personal belongings. She thanked Mr. Pike, then returned to the Silvergate house, alone in her room. She set the box on the bed and lifted the lid with careful hands. Inside lay objects that carried her father's presence so vividly it made her chest ache. His silver pocket watch, its cover scratched from years of use. A fountain pen she herself had given him on his birthday long ago. Beneath those lay a daguerreotype of herself as a child, nestled between her smiling parents when the family was still whole. At the bottom rested a small leather-bound journal. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The pages bore her father's familiar handwriting, strong yet slanted with the years. She read in silence, her throat tightening as she absorbed his words. Entries filled with reflections on the law, on justice, on the weight of decisions he carried as a judge. Notes about the weather, about the quiet of his little ranch retreat. And scattered among them, like jewels, were lines about her, his daughter far away in Ashford. He wrote of his pride in her accomplishments, his regret over the distance that had grown between them, and his hope that she might one day understand the choices he had made. Tears blurred her vision. She pressed the journal to her chest, overcome by the sudden nearness of a man she had thought lost to her forever. For the first time since arriving in Montana, she felt not only grief but a deep connection. one that bridged the years of silence. When the dinner hour approached, she carefully returned the items to the box, straightened her dress, and made her way downstairs. The bustle of the hotel dining room, the scent of roasted meat and fresh bread, and the knowledge that Jacob would be waiting brought a steadiness back to her steps. Tomorrow they would ride to her father's land together, and she would face the future not as a professor from Ashford, but as the heir to a piece of Montana soil, with choices heavy in her hands. And for reasons she could not yet name, the thought of Jacob McKenna riding beside her made those choices seem a little less daunting. One entry in Judge Carraway's journal lingered in Eliza's thoughts long after she had set it aside. I received a letter from Eliza today. Her father had written, "She writes of her students and her work. But between the lines, I hear a loneliness like my own. I wish I could bridge the distance, not only in miles, but in the silence of years. Perhaps when she comes here to settle my affairs, she will find something in this place that still speaks to her heart." Eliza closed the leather-bound book with trembling hands. He had known, even at a distance. Her father had recognized the hollowness she carried, and he had hoped she might find healing in the land he loved. Tears blurred her eyes until a knock at the door startled her. She checked the small clock on the bedside table. It was already past 6. She had lost herself completely in her father's words. Hastily wiping her face, she tucked the journal into the box and called, "Just a moment." When she opened the door, Jacob McKenna stood there, his brow furrowed when he saw her red-rimmed eyes. "I was worried when you didn't come down," he said quietly. "Eliza, what's wrong?" She gestured to the open box on the bed. "I was reading through my father's things. I lost track of time." Understanding softened Jacob's features. "There's no need to apologize. If you'd rather be alone tonight, we can share dinner another time." But Eliza surprised herself with the swiftness of her reply. "No, please. I would welcome the company. Later, in the modest dining room of the Silvergate house." They shared a meal while Eliza explained what she had learned from Mr. Pike and her plan to see the ranch the next day. "I'd value your opinion," she told Jacob, "even if it isn't a working spread. I want to know its worth before deciding anything." "I'll help however I can," Jacob assured her. Then, with a rueful smile, he added, "Though you should know I'm not exactly impartial." Eliza tilted her head, puzzled. "What do you mean?" His blue eyes held hers steadily. "I mean that I find myself hoping you'll have reason to stay in Montana longer than you planned." Heat rose in her chest at the implication, though he quickly continued, "You have a life in Ashford. I know that, but I wanted you to understand where I stand." They let the moment pass into lighter conversation, but his words lingered like the echo of a bell. The next morning dawned crisp and bright. Jacob arrived with the wagon, and together they set off for Judge Carraway's property. The road wound along the river, then climbed into rolling hills where groves of aspen shimmered in the sun. "Your father chose well," Jacob said as they crested a rise. Eliza caught her breath. The cabin sat on a gentle slope, its porch facing a meadow scattered with wildflowers. Behind the house the mountains rose jagged and strong, while before it a creek wound silver through the grass. "It's just as he described in his letters," she whispered. The wagon rolled to a stop. For a long moment Eliza sat motionless, overwhelmed by the weight of place and memory. "Take your time," Jacob said softly. "I'll see to the barn and corral while you go inside." "Grateful." She nodded and stepped down with the key in her hand. The door groaned as it opened, revealing a room both humble and warm. A stone fireplace anchored the space, with bookshelves lining the walls. She recognized many of the volumes from her childhood home. A desk by the window held neatly stacked papers, and 2 chairs were arranged to catch both the fire's glow and the view outside. Eliza moved slowly through the cabin, brushing her hand along the familiar spines of books, lingering over the scent of leather and ink. In the bedroom, she found framed photographs her parents on their wedding day, herself in a white gown on college graduation, a faded portrait of her father cradling her as an infant. Her throat tightened. Even through years of silence, he had kept her close. Outside, she found Jacob studying the corral fence. "Your father's caretaker did fine work," he said. "The place is sound. The barn roof could use mending within a year or 2, but nothing urgent. Creek's a good water source, and the pasture's healthy." "It's smaller than your spread," Eliza observed, brushing her hand along the weathered boards. "Much smaller." He agreed. "But a solid piece of land. Someone could run a small herd here, raise horses, or keep it simply as a retreat. Land like this will always call to someone." Together, they walked down to the creek. Eliza crouched and trailed her fingers in the icy water. "He loved it here," she whispered. "I can feel it." Jacob's gaze lingered on her. "It's the kind of place that captures a heart," he said. He wasn't looking at the meadow, but at her. Eliza met his eyes, her pulse quickening. She thought of his words the night before, of the possibility they both skirted around but hadn't named. She drew a breath. "Jacob, about what you said." The sound of hoofbeats cut her off. A rider approached, a man in his 50s with a weathered face and plain clothes that spoke of work rather than show. "That must be Mr. Frost." "The caretaker," Eliza said, half relieved by the interruption. She wasn't sure herself what she had been about to confess. Gideon Frost dismounted with a nod, his handshake firm but respectful. "Miss Carraway, I presume your father was particular about this place, wanted everything kept in order. I've done my best." He led them around the property, pointing out repairs he had made and features that made the ranch desirable. Judge Carraway was proud of this land. Always said it was where he could breathe. Eliza listened, her chest tightening with both grief and gratitude. Here, on this quiet acreage, she felt her father's presence stronger than anywhere else since her arrival in Montana. Jacob stayed close, silent for the most part, but every so often his hand brushed against hers as they walked. And each time, the unspoken truth between them seemed to grow. By the time the wagon rolled back into Silvergate that late afternoon, Eliza Carraway had a clearer sense of her father's land and its value. What she lacked was clarity about her own heart. The day had given her much to consider, not only about her inheritance, but about the man who had stood by her side through every step. Jacob excused himself to see to matters at the bank, promising to return in time for dinner. Alone in her room at the Silvergate house, Eliza lifted her father's journal from the box once more, searching its pages for guidance. Near the end, she found an entry written only weeks before his death. "I rode to the aspens today and watched the leaves burn gold in the autumn sun. This place gives me peace I have not found elsewhere. I thought of Eliza. I wonder if she will ever walk these meadows and understand why they called me so strongly. We are alike, my daughter and I, seekers of beauty, stubborn in our convictions. I hope she finds a place that speaks to her soul as this land has spoken to mine." Her breath caught. Closing the journal, she felt a deep certainty settle over her. When she joined Jacob for supper that evening, she no longer carried doubt. "I have made my decision," she told him once their meal was served. His brows lifted. "About the ranch?" "Yes." She steadied herself. I am not going to sell it. Surprise flickered across his face. You mean to keep it? Even if you go back to Ashford, I'm not certain I will return to Ashford, at least not to stay, Eliza said, the words tumbling free with unexpected rightness. I will need to go back to set my affairs in order, resign from the college properly. But after that, I think I will come back here, to Montana. Hope lit Jacob's expression. Eliza, are you sure this is no small choice? She nodded, reading his words, walking his land. I understand why he could not leave. And she drew a breath, meeting Jacob's eyes. There are other reasons I might want to remain. His hand found hers across the table, rough palm warm against her skin. I would be lying if I said I was not glad to hear that. From the moment I caught you on that trail, I felt something I could not explain, a connection I never expected, but now cannot imagine being without. Eliza turned her hand in his, their fingers intertwining. I feel it too. It has happened quickly, but it feels more real than anything before. Jacob's smile curved slow and deep, the familiar dimple appearing at his cheek. Life out here is not easy, he warned, though joy shone in his eyes. Different from what you know. I know, Eliza said softly, but perhaps I have been waiting for something that would demand more of me. The wagon that nearly killed me also woke me. I have not felt so alive in years. He chuckled. I cannot promise to be there every day to catch you from runaway wagons, but I can promise life with me would never be dull. Life with you, she repeated, her heart leaping at the words. Jacob's expression grew solemn. It may be soon, too soon, but I know my mind. I care for you, Eliza Carraway, more than I thought possible in such a short time. I will not ask for promises tonight. Only this when you return from Ashford. Give us the chance to see what might grow. Eliza's certainty blossomed. She tightened her grip on his hand. I will. I promise I will come back. The next morning she sat once more across from Mr. Thaddeus Pike, informing him of her choice. His thin brows rose. You wish to retain the property? Yes. Mr. Frost will continue as caretaker until I return. Mr. Pike leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. Your father often said he hoped you might come to love Montana as he did. I believe he would be gratified. The days that followed were filled with arrangements. Eliza purchased clothing and necessities for her return east, and ensured Mr. Gideon Frost was secured as caretaker for the little ranch. Jacob lingered in town under the excuse of supplies and meetings, but his true purpose was clear. He stayed close. Together they explored Silvergate. He showed her the grand houses of mine barons and the clapboard storefronts of hard-working merchants. They attended a small theatrical play in the town hall, dined at the best restaurant the city could offer, and one evening Jacob took her, daringly, to a dance hall. Under the glow of lamplight and the sound of fiddles, he swept her into the swirl of dancers. His steps were confident, his lead steady, and Eliza laughed breathlessly. Where did you learn to dance so well? She teased as he spun her through a lively turn. My mother insisted, Jacob replied with a grin. She claimed no son of hers would stomp like a buffalo on a floor. She made my father build a platform in the barn and drilled us both. Eliza laughed again, warmed by the thought of the woman who had raised him. They danced until her cheeks flushed and her heart felt light. Each day drew them closer. Their conversations ranged wide literature, the philosophy of justice, the challenges of cattle ranching, dreams of children they might someday raise. By the time her departure date loomed, What had begun as an accident on a dusty trail had become something deeper and undeniable. The morning of her leaving, the stagecoach stood ready to carry her toward Bozeman, where she would catch the train east. Her newly purchased trunk sat loaded, her father's journal carefully packed inside. "It is only for a few months," she said as they waited by the station, trying to keep her voice steady. "I will write as soon as I reach Ashford, and again when I can return." "I will be counting the days," Jacob said quietly. The driver called for passengers. Jacob reached into his pocket and drew out a small carved wooden box. He pressed it into her hands. "For you," he said simply. Her fingers trembled as she lifted the lid. Inside lay a silver locket, its surface engraved with delicate scrollwork. She opened it to find a pressed wildflower on one side and a tiny sketch of the Circle M Ranch on the other. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "It belonged to my mother. Jacob told her. She gave it to me before she passed. Told me to keep it until I found someone I wanted to share my life with. I would like you to have it not as a promise I demand, but as a hope I carry." Emotion thickened her throat. She rose on tiptoe, pressing a kiss to his cheek. "I will treasure it, and I will come back." The coach driver called again, with a last look. Eliza climbed aboard. Jacob stood tall, his hat in hand, watching as the horses lunged forward and carried her away down the dusty road. Inside the coach, Eliza clutched the locket, her heart torn between two worlds. But even as the distance grew, she knew her path had shifted. Ashford might hold her past, but Montana, its wide skies, its wild beauty, and the man waiting for her held her future. Jacob pressed the carved wooden box into Eliza's hand, his voice low and steady. "I want you to have this. Open it once you're on your way." Her protest died on her lips when he silenced her with a kiss. It was their first true kiss, gentle yet unshakable, carrying with it a pledge neither of them dared speak aloud. When he pulled back, his eyes gleamed with emotion. "Come back to me, Eliza Carraway." "I will," she whispered, her heart racing. "I promise." The stagecoach jolted forward, Silvergate fading behind her. Eliza finally lifted the lid of the wooden box. Inside lay a delicate silver pendant shaped like an aspen leaf, dangling from a fine chain. Beneath it was a slip of paper. Jake's bold hand scrawled across it. "So you'll remember the place that brought us together. Safe journey and swift return. Yours, Jake." Tears blurred her vision as she fastened the necklace around her throat, the cool silver resting against her skin like a talisman. It was more than jewelry. It was a reminder of the path her life had taken and the man who waited for her return. The long journey east was wearying, but Eliza scarcely noticed. Her thoughts overflowed with plans, with letters she longed to write, with the vision of Montana's wide skies. By the time the train pulled into Boston, she had rehearsed a dozen explanations for her mother. Elena Preston, elegant in her Beacon Hill parlor, listened first with shock, then with quiet reflection as Eliza recounted her near death on the trail, her days at the Circle M, her father's journal, and finally her decision not to sell the ranch. "You have the same look in your eyes your father carried when he first returned from Montana," Elena said softly at last. "That certainty. I fought it then, tried to make him choose between that wild place and us. I see now I was wrong," Mother Eliza began. But Elena lifted a hand. "Let me finish. Your father and I grew apart for many reasons, not just distance. We were young, too different, too stubborn, but I never stopped caring for him. and I never should have made you feel you had to choose between us. If Montana calls to you as it did to him, and if this Jacob McKenna gives you happiness, you have my blessing. Life is too short to deny what stirs your heart." Eliza threw her arms around her mother, relief and gratitude surging through her. The weeks that followed swept her into a flurry of activity. She resigned from her teaching post at the women's college, explaining to the bewildered dean that family affairs required her relocation. She sold or gifted most of her belongings, keeping only a small library of books, treasured mementos, and clothing suitable for frontier life. Through it all, letters flew between Boston and Montana. Jake's came faithfully each week, full of news from the ranch. Ephraim's colorful stories, Silas Turner's slow recovery, the autumn calves thriving. Beneath his practical updates ran a current of longing that matched her own. "The aspens are turning gold." He wrote one October evening, "I rode to your father's place and sat on the porch, imagining you there beside me. Gideon Frost has the place well kept. My father keeps asking when you'll return, swearing he needs someone who properly appreciates his stories. But I believe he misses you nearly as much as I do," Eliza replied with equal fervor. "Boston feels like a dream now," she confessed. "Or perhaps Montana was the dream, and I am merely sleepwalking here until I return to what has become more real to me than the life I knew for years." At last, by early November, her arrangements were complete. She booked passage west, timing her arrival in Silvergate for the week before Thanksgiving. A telegram sped ahead with the details. The journey back seemed endless. She read Jake's letters over and over, traced the words of her father's journal, and dreamed of the mountains. Yet as the train neared Bozeman, nerves stirred. What if their connection had been born only of circumstance? What if Montana's winter proved harsher than she could endure? What if she was making the gravest mistake of her life? Then she saw him. On the platform. Jacob stood tall in his best coat, scanning the windows with anxious eyes. The moment he spotted her, a smile broke across his face, transforming it into something radiant. All her doubts dissolved. Before the train had fully stopped, Eliza pressed to the door. Jake was already there, his strong arms lifting her down as though she weighed nothing. She melted against him, breathing in the scent of leather and pine, the solid warmth of him more real than her months of imagining. "You're really here," he murmured into her hair. "I half feared you'd change your mind." "Never," she said fiercely, drawing back just enough to meet his eyes. "This is where I belong." Their kiss was sweet and sure, a homecoming and a beginning all at once. The stagecoach to Silvergate was filled with chatter, as though they had to make up for every day spent apart. Jake told her that Silas Turner had regained enough strength to travel west to his family in Oregon. Mrs. Nora Kincaid had fallen ill for a time, but was now recovering. The Circle M had enjoyed a prosperous season, with healthy calves and a good harvest from their modest garden. Eliza, in turn, shared stories of her final weeks in Boston, of selling her belongings, of her mother's blessing, of the letters she had clutched like lifelines. Together, they bridged the distance those months had caused. As the coach crested the last ridge and the familiar valley opened before them, Eliza pressed her hand to the silver aspen leaf resting at her throat. The sun lay golden across the land, the mountains rising steadfast behind. She leaned against Jacob's shoulder, a smile curving her lips. "I am home," she whispered. And for the first time in years, the word rang true. As the stagecoach rattled toward Silvergate, Jacob's hand closed firmly over Eliza's, his thumb brushing lightly against her skin. His voice carried a nervous tremor she had never heard before. "I have news, too," he said, eyes steady but uncertain. "I did a good deal of thinking while you were gone." Eliza's stomach fluttered. What kind of thinking? The sort that makes a man want to set down a path for the future, our future. "If you'll have it." Her breath caught. "I'm listening." Jacob drew in a long breath, as if summoning courage. "I know you've only just come back, and there's still much we have to learn about each other. But what I feel for you isn't fleeting. It's something steady, something I know will last. I don't wish to rush you, Eliza, but I want you to know my intentions." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. From it, he tipped a simple gold ring, set with a modest but flawless diamond, into his palm. "This belonged to my grandmother," he said softly. "I'm not asking for an answer this instant, but I am asking you to consider becoming my wife when the time feels right." Tears filled Eliza's eyes as she looked from the ring to Jacob's earnest face. "Jacob McKenna, are you truly proposing to me in a stagecoach?" A flush climbed his neck. "I suppose I am. I meant to wait, to do it properly at your father's ranch, with the mountains behind us. But now that you're here, I can't hold the words back any longer." Eliza's laughter rang out, bright and unrestrained. "It's perfect, Jacob. Perfect because it's you, straightforward and true." She extended her left hand. "Yes, I will marry you. Perhaps we wait a little while, just to see how we suit each other in everyday life, as well as in moments of danger. But my answer is yes." His hands trembled slightly as he slid the ring onto her finger. "I'm certain already," he murmured. "But if patience is what you need, then patience is what I'll give." Patience, as it turned out, wasn't needed for long. Within weeks, Eliza had taken up residence at her father's ranch, with Mrs. Kincaid's niece coming daily to serve as companion and help. Jacob rode over nearly every day, and together they began to plan not only their wedding, but also their future. They decided to join their lives and their lands, using the Circle M as their primary home, but keeping Judge Carraway's smaller spread as a retreat. Ephraim McKenna was delighted by the arrangement, declaring loudly that the ranch had been far too quiet for far too long. By Christmas, all lingering doubts had faded like mist beneath the morning sun. On the first day of the new year, 1886, Eliza and Jacob were wed in the little white church in Cedar Ridge. Snow lay deep on the ground, and the air outside bit at exposed skin. But inside the chapel glowed warm with lanterns, laughter, and love. Ephraim McKenna beamed with fatherly pride. Mrs. Nora Kincaid dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief, overcome with joy. Mr. Thaddeus Pike, in honor of Judge Carraway, gave the bride away. His normally stern expression softened with feeling. Even Eliza's mother, though absent in body, sent a warm letter and a generous gift that arrived just in time for the ceremony. Their married life unfolded as Jacob had predicted, filled with challenges and joys in equal measure. Montana's winters proved as harsh as they were beautiful. Bitter winds rattled the shutters, and snow piled high against the doors. Yet Eliza discovered a deep contentment in those long evenings by the fire, reading aloud from her beloved poets while Jacob carved wooden toys and figures by the hearth. When spring came, the pastures came alive with bawling calves. Summer brought back-breaking work in the hayfields, sweat rolling down brows under the unrelenting sun. Autumn arrived with the aspens turning gold, the air crisp and clean, and a deep satisfaction that the ranch would endure another year. Through it all, their love grew stronger. They quarreled on occasion over chores, over decisions, over Jacob's habit of taking risks she deemed unnecessary. But each quarrel ended with laughter, with reconciliation, and with the certainty that nothing could break the bond forged between them. A year after their wedding, Eliza gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Olivia Eleanor. Jacob held the tiny bundle with reverence, awe written plain across his rugged features. "She has your eyes," he whispered, brushing a finger across his daughter's cheek. "And your dimple," Eliza replied, smiling weakly as exhaustion mingled with joy. "Poor child." Jacob chuckled, lowering himself carefully beside his wife. Then his voice dropped. "Never in my life have I been so grateful for a runaway wagon. Who could have guessed where it would lead us?" Eliza leaned against him, her heart full. "I think my father knew," she murmured. "In his journal, he wrote that he hoped I would find a place that spoke to my soul. He couldn't have known it would be here, with you. But I believe he would be pleased." Jacob kissed her forehead gently. "And I believe he would be proud of the life you've built here." The years rolled on, rich with labor and laughter. 2 more children joined their family: Thomas Oliver, bold and restless, and Frederick James, thoughtful and steady, healthy, lively boys who took to ranch life with unrestrained energy. Under Jacob's steady hand and Eliza's quiet influence, the Circle M prospered. It grew into one of the most respected ranches in the territory, its name spoken with admiration in Cedar Ridge and Silvergate alike. Neighbors sought Jacob's advice on cattle, water rights, and land disputes, while Eliza became known for her wisdom, her kindness, and her unshakable strength. Montana's land was still wild, still demanding, but it was theirs, woven with their love, their labor, their laughter, and with each passing season, Eliza Carraway knew more surely than ever that when that runaway wagon threw her into Jacob McKenna's arms, it had hurled her not into disaster, but into her destiny. In the years that followed, Eliza Carraway carved out her own place in the Montana community. At first, it was small things helping Mrs. Kincaid's niece with Sunday school lessons or sewing quilts for families in need. But before long, her love of books and learning inspired her to create something lasting. She gathered volumes from her own shelves, ordered more from Boston, and persuaded neighbors to contribute as well. From these beginnings, she established a little lending library in Cedar Ridge, where children and ranch hands alike came to borrow books. On winter afternoons, she sometimes read aloud to eager youngsters, her voice filling the schoolhouse with the cadences of poetry and adventure. And on occasion, she taught short lessons in literature to those who longed to learn more, planting seeds of imagination in the rugged soil of the territory. Eliza also began to write, sending articles to newspapers back east. Her essays described Montana with clarity and tenderness, the sweep of the land, the harsh beauty of its seasons, the courage of those who called it home. Her words traveled far beyond Silvergate and Cedar Ridge, earning her a modest reputation as a regional writer. Though she never sought fame, she was quietly proud that her voice carried stories of the frontier to readers who might never see it for themselves. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jacob surprised her with a gift that left her speechless. Bound in fine leather was a collection of her published writings, carefully arranged alongside the letters they had exchanged during their time apart. "For our grandchildren," he explained, his voice warm as she leafed through the pages, tears gathering in her eyes. "So they'll know how it all began with a runaway wagon and a cowboy who happened to be in the right place at the right time, the very right place." Eliza agreed, lifting her gaze to the man who had become the center of her world. At 40, Jacob was still every bit as striking as when she first saw him on that fateful trail. There was silver at his temples now, and lines etched by years of sun and laughter framed his eyes. But to her he was only more handsome. "I think I've been falling into your arms ever since that day," she whispered. That evening, as the sun sank behind the jagged mountains and the porch of the Circle M glowed in the fading light, Eliza felt a fullness she could never have imagined in her Boston days. Once, she had thought of herself as a professor, a daughter, a woman defined by books and duty. Now she understood she had become part of something larger: wife, mother, partner, and storyteller of a life more complete than any she had dreamed. "Any regrets?" Jacob asked quietly, sensing the direction of her thoughts. She leaned into his shoulder, smiling. "Not one. Every choice, every twist in the road brought me right here, exactly where I belong." In the distance, the shrill laughter of their children floated across the yard. Olivia, Thomas, and Frederick darted like colts around their grandfather, who at 75 still managed to chase them with surprising energy. Ephraim McKenna's booming laugh carried on the breeze, and the ranch hands finished their day's work nearby, leading horses into the corral while the smell of supper drifted from the kitchen. Mrs. Kincaid's niece, who had long since taken over her aunt's duties, was preparing the evening meal, her humming mingling with the sounds of the household. The Circle M was alive with rhythm and purpose, a place where love and labor wove seamlessly together. "You know," Jacob said reflectively, his gaze fixed on the horizon, where the last streaks of gold gave way to purple twilight. "When I was a young man, I used to ride the fence lines and wonder what my life would come to. Would I build something worth leaving behind, or would it all vanish like dust on the trail?" "And have you found your answer?" Eliza asked, though she already knew. His arm tightened around her shoulders. "More than I ever dreamed. Not just the ranch, though I'm proud of what we've made here. It's you, Eliza, you and our children, the life we've built. That's the true legacy." The first stars appeared overhead, faint pinpricks in the vast Montana sky. Eliza tilted her head back, marveling as she always did at how infinite it seemed. Her heart swelled with gratitude for the wagon that had thrown her into Jacob's arms, for the land that had called her father west and had now claimed her as well, for every struggle and triumph that had shaped their shared life. Life on the frontier had never been easy. Winters tested their endurance, droughts tested their resolve, and lean years tested their ingenuity. Yet every hardship was matched by joys, the birth of their children, the laughter of family gathered around the table, the satisfaction of land well cared for, the beauty of Montana's untamed splendor. Eliza knew her life could have taken countless other paths. She might have remained in Boston, growing old among stone buildings and crowded streets, teaching her students without ever feeling the wind of the prairie on her face. But fate had intervened in the form of a runaway wagon, and that moment of terror had turned into the greatest blessing she would ever know. As she rested against Jacob's side, listening to the contented murmur of the ranch around her, Eliza understood that her story was still being written. Each day brought new challenges, new triumphs, and new chapters. And as long as she had Jacob's steady heart beside her, she would never walk alone. The silver leaf pendant at her throat glimmered in the lantern light, a constant reminder of the promise they had made long ago. Strong arms, a steady heart, and love that had weathered storms that was her life now, and she would not have traded it for anything in the world. At its heart, this story reminds us that life's greatest blessings often come disguised as trials. Eliza never imagined that terror on a runaway wagon would lead her to love, purpose, and a new home in Montana. Many of us, especially as we grow older, know the sting of loss, regret, or missed chances. Yet, like Eliza, we may discover that even in our most uncertain moments, life can surprise us with beauty and renewal. The lesson is simple but profound. Do not fear the unexpected turns in the road. Sometimes what feels like disaster is the very moment that sets us on the path we were always meant to walk. And love, whether it comes from family, friends, or a lifelong partner, is what steadies us when the world feels wild and unkind. For those of us in our later years, Eliza's story is a gentle reminder that it is never too late to find new beginnings, to cherish love, and to create a legacy of hope for those who come after us. Every chapter, no matter our age, is still a chance to write something beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us today. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like, share it with someone you love, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt tales of courage, love, and second chances to life. Until next time, may your own journey be filled with hope and joy.